Every one of us carries a story we don't always talk about. The quiet battles, the heavy days, the moments that cracked us open, and the moments that stitched us back together. We've all stumbled. We've all broken. We've all stood at the edge of something we weren't sure we could come back from. And somehow, through strength we didn't know we had, we rose anyway. Because inside every person, there is a spark that refuses to die, a hope that refuses to stay silent, a heart that refuses to give up no matter how dark the night gets. And that's why we're here, to listen, to learn, to witness the courage it takes just to be human. Every soul you hear on the show has walked through something that shaped them, sharpened them, and carried them forward. Everyone has a story. Everyone has a battle. Everyone has a journey. And this is where you come to hear it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Uncle Jimmy's podcast, where the raw truth collides with the unbreakable spirit. Today, we stand in awe of Laverne Friesen, a warrior forged in the fires of occult's darkness, sexually shattered as a child, hardened by law enforcement's brutal front lines, and reborn from the wielding, healing spirituality and fatherhood as his sword and shield. He didn't just survive, he shattered cycles, turning personal hell into a beacon for every soul clawing toward light. Laverne, your journey isn't just inspiring, it's a thunderclap reminding us all that our deepest scars birth our greatest strength. Brother, the stage is yours. Let's unleash the unfiltered truth.
Thanks for having me, Jimmy.
Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. I really do. I appreciate you coming on. So, this is a small little thing here, right? Imagine a boy, listeners, right? Eyes wide with innocent faith, trapped in a religious cult where love twisted into torment, sexual abuse ripping away his childhood, family silence sealing the wounds. Fast forward, Laverne Friesen escapes, dons the badge of law enforcement chasing justice while shadows of trauma stalked him relentlessly. Abusive relationships piled on, isolation crushed his spirit, and a mental health crisis exploded. Depression's black hole, anxiety's vice grip, suicidal whispers in the night. But here's the rousing truth. Laverne didn't break. He dove into the therapy trenches, EMDR, unraveling knots, breath work, igniting fire, the meditation, forging steel. Spirituality became his compass. Fatherhood his North Star. Today, as a devoted dad, he breaks cycles his abusers etched, teaching his kids empathy over fear, presence over pain. Laverne's not whispering hope, he's roaring it. From crooked creeks of despair to peaks of purpose, his story screams, you are not your scars, you are the phoenix rising. Listeners, grip your hearts. Laverne Friesen is here to rattle your soul and to light your path. So Laverne, like I said, it's a bit of an introduction, right?
Yeah, I love what you did with the Crooked Creeks thing there. That's
everybody that comes on, they love my introduction. I do an introduction, I do a closing, but I do a deep dive into you. So I try to get the spirit of who you are and what you've been through. And then we get into the 20 questions, right? So I know my listeners will probably be like, when's he going to get into it, right? So take us back to the cult, right? Paint the nightmare of your childhood. What was the first moment you realized this isn't normal?
It's almost a hard question, because when you're a child and you're being raised in something that is normal, right? Whatever that is. When I was about 5 years old, though, I started questioning things, and I've always asked why, and I've always wanted to understand the why. And it was a Anabaptist cult. Basically, you have to be born again and then baptized in. Like, you're not automatically baptized in as a kid, which is another scenario, because they do pressure children into making decisions that will affect them for the rest of their life. But when I was about 5, I remember being in a store with my mom, and the staff in the store were putting up the Christmas decorations. And I'm like, why don't we put up Christmas decorations? Why don't we have a Christmas tree? And I don't remember the answer. And I remember asking, I'm like, but we believe in the whole concept of Christmas. So why don't we celebrate it like this? And I still don't remember the answer, but I wasn't satisfied. It didn't make sense to me. And then there were other things that made me question. And so when I was also about 5 or 6, we lived in a very rural area. We were about an hour from town, and we lived on a gravel road. And I guess down in the States, you guys call it dirt roads. But we were way out in the country, and a police car went by with its lights and sirens on. And I was young enough that I was scared. I'm like, so I ran in the house, and my mom asked me why I was scared. And I said, well, a police car went by or whatever. And she's like, he's on his way to help someone. And I'm like, I want to be a police officer. Well, you can't. Why can't I be a police officer? Well, then you have to carry a gun. And I'm like, but yeah, that's to protect people. No, you can't do that. We don't believe. And that, to me, that made no sense. And then that religion also believes that they are the one true church. They are the only people that would go to heaven. And that didn't make sense to me. I'm like, but there's so many people in the world and they're good people. Like, they're not all bad. And they're like, well, no. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense. Like, there's not that many bad people. And I would sit, and we had one of those station wagons. They used to have like a seat behind the driver's seat, and then they had a rear facing seat where you could look out the back window.
Yeah. Yeah. My dad
That's
had one of those, a blue one.
Yeah. So that's dating ourselves, I think. But I would sit in that back seat, look out the back window, and I would wave at people that went by, and they'd wave back and they'd smile. And I'm like, not all those people are bad, right? There's no like, and so I knew early on that something didn't match. But of course, at that age, you're too young to kind of articulate that. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, my mom was very violent, very angry. Some of my earliest memories are of being screamed at. And I remember, and I was the black sheep. I got, or the scapegoat. I got punishment for things I didn't do, or things my siblings could get away with, but I couldn't. And I remember my mom screaming at me one day, and I have no idea what it was for, but what I remember clearly is I walked out of the house and I said, I am never going to join that church if this is what they're like. And I could see the hypocrisy, right? Because they go to church, they preach love and all this other stuff, and then there's violence and anger in the home. And I knew that just wasn't right. And so
And how old were you at this point, Laverne?
I would have been 8 or 9.
Okay.
I'm not really 100% sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But you questioned
So,
it already.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is, at that age, I said I was never going to join that church, and I never did. And they put a ton of religious pressure on you. You have people as early as about 10, 11, people coming up to you, preachers coming up to you. When are you going to join the church? When are you going to serve God? And that's religious abuse, right? They're trying to coerce you into joining their church, right?
So what was it like as a little, what was that like, at 10 and 11, people trying to force you to join a church and, and force you? What was that like as a kid? Were you like teetering back and forth, or were you strong in your belief that you weren't going to join that church?
I was strong in my belief, but I had to be a chameleon. And I was probably about 12 when I decided, you know what? I'm going to go into law enforcement. But I couldn't tell anyone that, because then they would know that I wasn't going to join the church. So I told everybody I wanted to become a paramedic. And that was a more acceptable career choice. It wasn't totally acceptable, but it was more acceptable. So I told everybody that. And then I was a chameleon. I would blend in, I would hide. There was a lot of hiding from preachers, a lot. You got to know who the more zealous, members of that organization were. And so I would hide from them too. But there was always anxiety about like who's going to ask you next, who's going to do, talk to you, who's going to corner you somewhere, because they would corner you. When I was 14, I had a preacher corner me in a church and said, what if you die tonight? What if the world ends tonight and you go to hell? Right? And like, that's just horrific to a child.
Kid.
And yeah, and to put kind of fast forward, 30 years, I was in my early 40s, very confident person, and I was in a store here in the city I live, and I saw a man from my childhood that was, was about 10 years older than me. I never had any issues with this guy. And as soon as I saw him, I hid. I instinctively hid. My body wanted to hide. And I realized later through, talking with my therapist, that it was from all those times, having to hide as a kid, that my body remembered, and I just ducked.
Yeah,
Right.
put you right, like almost right back as there as being a kid again.
Yeah. 100.
Yeah. Yeah. Almost like re-traumatizing you again, right?
Yeah. What was interesting about that point though is, once I was hiding behind the aisle, I'm like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And then I'm like, okay, do I want to talk to this guy or do I not want to talk to him? And I'm like, no, I don't feel like talking to him. All right, well, I'm going to just walk around until I can go past him, because he was right at the entrance, right? But yeah, it's interesting how a childhood like that affects you so much.
Yeah, and you don't think it, right? As you're growing up in it, you don't think of it, but you have the, presence to think, and it's going through your head, question it at a young age, right? And that leads me into the next question, which is a tough one, and you can discuss it, you cannot, but sexual abuse from those that you trusted most, right? How did it wrap your view of faith, family, and yourself at such a young age?
Man, that's I don't even know if I have all the answers to that myself. So I want to start with in my home, I was not allowed to have a voice. I did not allow, I could not set a boundary. That was prohibited. That was not allowed. And the whole church environment wouldn't permit that either. And
Yeah,
so the sexual abuse happened in the home of a fellow member's house, right?
house.
And so that abuse happened, and I told my brother, who's about 2 years older than me, what had happened. And the sad thing about that is that everybody my age knew that that was happening. And I remember several of my friends had told me what had happened to them and that they had told their parents. And it kept happening. And so when it happened, I was kind of like, oh, maybe it won't happen because no, everybody else that it's happened to has told their parents. So, maybe it won't happen to me because I knew that I was going into the lion's den there. Well, it happened, and I my brother told my dad, and that says a lot that I was too scared to tell my parents what had happened. Right? I wasn't you know comfortable discussing it with them. So my dad talks to me. He asks me some questions. And he felt genuine enough. Like to me, it feels genuine enough that memory. But I asked him. I said, "Isn't this illegal? And shouldn't we call the police?" And he said, "No, we always or yes, it is illegal, but no, we let the church deal with this stuff."
Deal.
So I can assure you that the church never dealt with it. So anyway, approximately 6 months later, we go back there and I was re-victimized. In the moments leading up to that re-victimization is probably the most horrific abandonment wound that anyone could receive, because basically what happened is it was after the meal and the lady of the house says, why don't you go out and play or go upstairs and play?" And I knew what happened upstairs.
Upstairs, yeah.
And so I was too scared to say anything because I wasn't given that autonomy to say anything. And then as I'm walking up the stairs, time stood still and I was filled with fear. I remember looking back at my parents, like screaming inside, "Say something. You guys know what happens here." And they were just both busy in their conversations. And yeah, so then I was re-victimized.
Yeah.
So
Now,
so
was this guy like an elder of the church, or?
no, he was a teenager. He was
Oh, okay.
I think 7 or 8 years older than me.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he was, obviously you had mentioned, your other your friends, right, had gone through the same thing with the same perpetrator?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
same guy, same guy, yeah.
So what's curious is I found out in later years someone close to him, and I won't say too much because you never know who listens,
Exactly.
told me that he thinks that this teenager's mom was complicit. He thinks that she knew what was happening. And both times like it happened to me is, why don't you guys go upstairs? Like, I mean, it can't happen to that many boys without somebody finding out, without, like, especially the parents. Even though they're brainwashed into the church, one of those parents had to say something,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
But I had a lot of anger towards the church because I believed that they had let it happen to me. I was very angry at that whole organization. That incident, along with my other childhood, told me that I wasn't worth it. I wasn't worth protecting. I was completely unworthy. There's the abandonment wound. So good luck.
yeah.
Like, in any type of relationship, extremely anxious attachment style, just terrified of anything bad happening, right? Like,
Happening, yeah. You're waiting for the
um,
other shoe to drop, right, when you're in a relationship.
yeah,
You're
and
waiting for
I
them
mean,
to leave, you're waiting for them to go because, everybody abandons you. Everybody leaves you.
everybody does.
Yeah. So oftentimes, right, you hold on as tight as you can. And sometimes when you are in a relationship, and it's not going good, you hold on as tight as you can. You make it even worse. But, some people don't understand what you're going through. You're just trying to hold on for dear life and have that love and that care, right, that you didn't get as a child from mom and dad. And, it's tough.
I would do absolutely anything to to hang on to a relationship, which of course is just me abandoning myself again, right? So not only is everybody else abandoning me, I'm abandoning myself. And this is something I discovered through therapy, but that icy fear that I felt going up that stairs resurfaced every single time a relationship ended. And I never connected the dots. And I could feel that icy fear in my body. And going up to the last time was about 2.5 years ago. And
Okay.
that's when I really dealt with it and like flushed it out of my system or felt the emotions from that and, processed that. But really, that goes so deep that I'll probably be dealing with that in some form for the rest of my life.
Rest of your life. And so you're doing your work, right? And you're going through the healing process. And I often say, right, I find that myself when the greatest work is done, right? It's almost you're sitting there in your own darkness, right? And for people that don't realize, right, sitting in your own darkness sometimes and being, going through it, and because in order to heal, right, you gotta go to that place, you gotta process it all, right, and you gotta process it now consciously,
Yes.
because when you're younger, it's almost subconsciously, oh, I'm gonna go hang out with him, and then it happens, right, and you don't even think about it because you're younger, and then hey, you tell mom and dad, they sort of brush it aside that it's illegal, but we're not going to say anything. The church will deal with it. So it's almost like everything's getting swept under the rugs. When you're doing that healing, right? You're in the dark, and it's not a great place to be, right? But as long as you don't stay there, that's the key to it, right? Because some people can get lost in their darkness and stay there. Because I've been
Yes.
down and out, I've been in the dark, but make sure for myself that I don't stay there because it's a dark place that nobody wants to be in. And I
Mhm.
can only imagine the pain that you were going through having to deal with that. And also, you're on the job, right? As in law enforcement. So you're not just dealing with your past trauma, right? You probably see trauma almost every night on the job.
Yeah. You know what? I just had this discussion with someone the other day, and it's not the trauma, like, so yeah, like we can see a lot of trauma and our minds as adults can process that. And there was a lot of trauma that I saw that didn't really bother me. That was, really morbid, I guess. But if there was like an abandonment theme, like especially that I could relate to,
That would hit
that's
you.
that's the stuff, right? It was the stuff that kind of reminded me of my childhood. That's the stuff that was the hardest to handle. And some of the times that's not even like, if I would, give an example, a real life example, a lot of people would be like, that's nothing,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like you were just at this fatal collision, a bunch of people died and whatever. Like those are ugly situations. And you're saying that this other thing is bugging you?
Is bothering you. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right? So it's interesting how our minds and our bodies react to things. I did a lot of traffic enforcement, a lot of highway patrol, and some of the stuff that bothered me the most was when people got angry and insulted me because I
Yeah.
was so wired to try to please everybody because I became this super people pleaser, which why would I even go into law enforcement? Like that's you're not making friends, right?
Yeah,
But
exactly.
which, so some of those were the ones that, like, really bothered me, and then but if you wanna get deeper into it, the reason I went into law enforcement, I think is two-part, is I was trying to be the protector that I didn't have as a child, and I was trying to get validation from what I could do to other people or for other people, right?
For
So
other people, yeah.
yeah, yeah, so
That's so, you joined law enforcement, right? But before that, right, you escaped the cult, right? What was that? What was the breaking point there
there, you know what? For me, there wasn't a breaking point because I knew since I was young that I was gonna leave, and
that
I
you weren't
just
gonna do that?
so basically it was the opportunity arose. So when I was 13, I wanted to stop going to church, but image is everything. And so it's very important that the children show up at church. Well, my dad started trying to fight me, like wrestle me, force me into the vehicle to go to church. And so I just started locking myself in my room and said, and I told him I was sick. I couldn't go to church. What are you going to do? You're going to kick the door down? No. So that went on for about a year until I was, 14 and a half. And then my parents had moved across the country. So we lived in Western Canada. We had a dairy farm. It was relatively successful. I think, maybe quite successful. I'm not even sure.
Yeah.
And because I was pretty young then. And we moved all the way across the country to the East Coast to this like small congregation of this church. And I believe it's because my dad thought he would have a better chance at becoming a preacher. But
Okay.
we went from, booming economy on one side of the country to like a very poor economy on the other side of the country. My dad couldn't really get a dairy farm going there. It was just he struggled quite a bit, and I hated everything. And so I had convinced my dad to let me come back out west and live with one of my uncles who had a farm and was also a member of this church. So I came out, I moved out here, and I went to school for so they have their own private schools, and they only go to grade 9 and grade 8 down in the US because that's the minimum allowed education. So I
Okay.
finished my grade 9, and I was working for a farmer, and then my older brother had gotten kicked out of the church by that time. He moved back to that community and got his own place. And as soon as he got his own place and kind of moved in, I'm like, "Hey, you going to let me move in with you?" And he's like, "Sure." And so when I was 16, I just, hindsight's 2020, but I was trying to get out.
Yeah.
My uncle and my aunt loved me. They were very good to me. The home life was normal, I guess. It
Yeah.
wasn't violent like at my parents, but it was still inside this cult. And
Inside the
so,
cult still, yeah.
yeah, so one night they went to a members meeting at the church, and I packed up all my stuff. I wrote them a note, and I moved in with my brother. And
That's
then
awesome. So that's the time when you basically break yourself from that whole hold of the church. Did your aunt and uncle force you to go to church?
yes, that was
Okay.
just an expectation, right? Like,
Okay.
and you know what? Like, it was better for me because I had my friends that I had grown up with before we had moved to the East Coast.
Yeah.
So most of them had, succumbed to the pressure and joined the church, but they were still my friends, and it
Yeah.
was okay. It's tolerable.
Yeah. So on the job, right, as a cop, how did the badge help you bury the trauma, or did it amplify the hypervigilance eating you alive?
That's such a good question. I think a bit of both. So I think the badge allowed me to be like, I'm a good person. I'm helping people, right? And I'm not even though it wasn't conscious, I'm not the unworthy person that, my childhood taught me to be. However, my hypervigilance was through the roof.
Okay.
Like, man, think about the way I lived back then and the way I live now that I'm not on the job anymore. It's so different. Like, yeah, it's so I would say it did both.
So walk us through the mental health crisis, right? The darkest night. What pulled you back from the edge when suicide whispered loudest?
For sure. It started, I was involved in a traffic stop on March 17th, 2017. And the individual was quite obnoxious, quite, I would say, irrational. Just couldn't talk to him. He took a picture of me and he posted it to social media, and he filled the comments with veiled threats and lies. And so I was really upset by that, and I demanded that my department do something about it. And the threats were veiled. They weren't clear threats. There was no criminal charge there, so they couldn't do that. But I wanted them to get the city lawyer involved and send them a letter saying cease and desist or whatever, right? And they wouldn't do that. And so my abandonment wound started getting resurfacing, right? So then shortly after that, I was placed on the bike patrol unit, the bicycle patrol unit, and I was having the most fun I'd ever had. I was riding through parks, I was riding through downtown, I was spending 8 hours a day on a bike. Like, man, I thought I was in heaven. And about a month after that, they pulled me off of that and they said, "You're going to train this person." And this person had a very difficult personality, and she had been in a lower position in the department. So a lot of people knew her. And then she got training or went off to training and got hired. And several people had just publicly made it known they weren't going to train her. So my management staff, they brought me in and they said, "You're the only one that can do this. And so you're going to do it." And I'm like, oh. So I couldn't do bike patrol anymore. So I was a little bitter. And I
Yeah.
started training her. And the stupidest thing was I spent the first month just getting, working on how to talk to people. Like, it was that bad. And I felt like I was failing. I put a lot of pressure on myself. And every time I went to find somebody to ask for advice, I never got any. And so then, of course, I'm starting to feel like I'm getting abandoned all over again, even though I didn't realize that was happening. And it just slowly went downhill from there. I started getting really angry. I started having bouts of rage. And I would fly off the handle and I'd be, in a state of anger for 2 days. And so I realized and I started getting jaw pain and muscle aches, and I thought I was burning out. So I went to see a therapist, and within me 5 minutes of talking to her, she's like, "You need to take a break," which I was terrified of because I thought I'd be perceived as weak or broken or whatever. So I go to my doctor and I said, I went to this therapist. She said to take some time off work. He said, "How much time do you want?" I'm like, "I don't know. Like, I don't know what's going on. Like, you tell me." And so I picked a date 3 weeks in the future because there was a course that I wanted to take. So I came back. I noticed I didn't feel any different. My first day back, I yelled at a supervisor, got, accused of insubordination, which was unlike me. That was not who I was.
Yeah.
And, I just went back to work and I did what I always did. I put my head down, did the best thing I could, best job I could. So then about 2 or 3 months after that, they reorganized all the shifts and my shift was left without a formal supervisor. And they came to me and they said, "Laverne, you're the de facto supervisor anyway. Here we go again." So now I'm just dead set on proving that I'm worthy of a formal promotion. And you know what? I burnt out about halfway through. So that was February. And so in Alberta here where I live, they have what's called the Selective Traffic Enforcement Program. And it basically, this is what you should focus on every month. And so for February, it was distracted driving. And I had seen a lot of distracted driving crashes and I seen the consequences. So I'm like, yeah, let's focus on this. And so any spare time we had, we were doing that. And about halfway through the month, I started to feel off. I started to feel like I can't even describe it. It's just like something's not right. But
Something's going on. It's not right. Yeah.
yeah, and but I did notice that it seemed like everyone I dealt with was abrasive. And so I set my sights to March 1st. I'm like, I'm just going to make it to March. That's it, right? Like I got to make it to March. March 1st came and I was apathetic, like absolutely nothing left. And I started just driving around. I wasn't doing anything. I would sit in parking lots and drink coffee and just like stare mindlessly out at traffic or play on my phone. And it started getting to the point where I couldn't sleep. And so I would lay in bed and I would ruminate about how horrible my life was. And what I hadn't realized yet then either was that I was a people pleaser. And so I had been going to work, doing everything I could at work to prove that I'm the best guy out there. And then I would go home and I would do everything I could to like prove that I was a good dad and a good husband. And I was just burning out. Like I had no energy left. And then I
In
couldn't
every
sleep.
facet of your life, your relationship, your work,
Yes,
everything. You're burning out on everything. Yeah.
100%. And so I would lay in bed, I'd ruminate about how horrible life was. And then the thoughts would come in. And eventually it got to the point where I was thinking about suicide. I'm like, this is the only way out. I don't see a way out. And in my career, I worked with a couple of guys, really good guys that were peer supporters. And they'd always said, if you're ever suffering, just reach out for help anytime. We'll help. And the closest I came, I started to type a text at 3 in the morning. And then I'm like, nope, no, I can't do this. Right. He's not going to understand. I'm going to end up in a merge under suicide watch, something like that. I can't do this. Right. And which, I had no understanding of anything.
Yeah. So all the negative, consequences of you coming forward saying, "Hey, I'm struggling. I'm going to hurt myself. Maybe commit suicide," is going through your head. Maybe lose your job, end up in the hospital, whatever it may be. But you're not
Who
thinking of,
knows?
hey, again, it goes back to the people pleasing, right? You're not
Yeah.
thinking of yourself, right? You
100.
know,
Yeah.
you know,
Yes. And so, at that time, there was one person in my life that I thought I could trust, that I thought would and could help me. And so I went to them and I tried to explain how dark it was, and the message wasn't received. And so all the shame in my life, from all my trauma, I just blamed myself. I'm like, dude, you can't even tell this person how bad it is. Like, right? And I got so desperate that I went to this person again and I laid it all out. And they looked me in the eye and they said, "I know." And then they walked out of the room.
wow.
And yeah, uh rock
So that
bottom for
must bring
sure.
you back again, right, to the abandonment. Everybody abandons you. You tell your mom and dad about what's going on at the house. They bring you back to the house. It's almost like, how much more can Laverne take, right? It's
Yeah.
building up. It's building up.
Yeah.
It's building up. It's building up.
I Dude, that night I was so close. But what saved me was back then 3-year-old daughter would wake up every night, and she would come into bed and she would crawl in beside me every single night, and she would tuck her head right into my armpit right here, and she would snuggle as close as she could get. So once again, that night while I'm laying in bed thinking about how horrible my life is and that I probably should do this, she comes and cuddles in close to me and reminds me, you can't do this.
Yeah.
You right? And
She
so
needs you. She needs you.
her little brother too, right?
Yeah.
She has a little brother. And so that was the only thing that kept me going. And I didn't know how, but I knew that I wanted to stay alive. And I kept plugging on, and I would lie to myself. I'm like, you know what? It's going to get better in the daylight. It never did. There was just more distractions. And I was, and the scariest part about this is, or not scariest, but maybe saddest, is that I was still seeing that counselor that I'd gone back to who told me I needed to take a leave, but she wasn't asking me the hard questions. She didn't understand, that first responder world. And all she told me was, "Oh, you just need to get a different job." And,
Yeah.
all I knew was law enforcement. And we just bought a new house, and like, where am I going to go? I can't go pump gas or I can't go do anything. Like, this is all I know.
Yeah.
And so that actually added to my despair because I'm like, I can't get out of this. Right.
Makes
And
it
then,
worse.
yeah. And then finally, an agency outside of the city posted a position and I applied for it and I got it. And through the whole hiring process, I was just like, they're going to see through this facade. Like, there's no way they're going to actually hire me. Right.
Yeah.
But they did. And I thought that would fix everything. And it didn't.
Yeah.
Right? It didn't. And then I was under less stress, but something felt off,
Still going
right?
through it.
Yeah. And so a couple months into that position, I was the first on scene to a collision out on a rural highway. There was 3 vehicles involved and I was there. I got there, I rolled up, I jumped out of my patrol vehicle and a couple comes up to me and they had 2 kids, 2 little kids that were crying and they were fine. They were just crying. And I tried to talk to them and I almost started crying. My mind started racing. And so I was experiencing a panic attack or an anxiety attack. I'm not really sure which, but I said something or I mumbled something to them and they seemed to be okay with it. So I went to check on the other occupants in the vehicles and there were 3 vehicles and I didn't see the third one until I walked up to it. And so I had never experienced tunnel vision before in anything I'd been involved in. And I tried helping the occupants of the vehicles. I couldn't. I couldn't talk. There was a young girl crying in the back seat of one of the vehicles, reminded me of my daughter. I wanted to console her so bad. And I couldn't say it. I couldn't talk. And so I just stood back and I watched. The fire department got there. There was a firefighter I knew. He was really good, poised and professional. And I was just so envious of him. I'm like, man, that's who I am or I'm supposed to be. And so then that's when I knew I'm like, I can't hide this. Like I have to find like a real therapist, someone that understands, somebody that can
Got to
help
get
me
to the
because
root.
yes. Yeah. And I did. And I'm so thankful that I was able to go find someone who understood it.
Yeah, that brings me to the next question, right? Was it the EMDR that helped you?
So yes and no.
Okay.
Sorry, yes, but EMDR for me was very hard, but it was
Yeah.
very helpful. And I don't know if, in case your listeners don't understand it, it's eye movement desensitization reprocessing. You follow these little dots on a screen. There's different speeds but before that, you think of how you're feeling, what's bothering you. You feel that feeling in your body. And then she asked me, when's the first time you felt that feeling? Well, the first time I felt that feeling was when I was going up those stairs
Yes.
when I was 9 years old, right? And so we do the whole process. I cried a lot, so exhausting. Like I cried for probably 45 minutes straight. It was just, whew. And then at the end of it, she says, ask something to the effect of like, name something good that happened or came out of that. And the answer was instant. I'm a better dad because of it. And so that reframe and processing that was huge. I should say threatened. She threatened me with EMDR a couple more times, but it was so hard that I would take like 2 weeks and I would try to process it myself because I didn't want to do that EMDR again. But perhaps like, so that was a huge piece in my healing, but like just going in there and talking to her. So I'm ADHD, I have ADHD. Well, I didn't know what that meant. So she's like, this is why you think like that. This is what, and she started explaining all of my unhelpful patterns that I had.
Yeah.
You need to make sure you get sleep. Here's how you can get sleep, right? Because that whole lack of sleep just wreaked havoc on my mental health. Like,
Exactly.
just killed it.
Yeah.
But yeah, learning about who I was and why I did what I did was incredibly helpful as well.
No, that's good. That's huge. So breaking generational curses, right? What daily practice ensures you parent with empathy, not the fear your abuser instilled in you?
Well, two come to mind immediately. And so I'm going to answer that two parts.
Yeah, no problem.
The first one is meditation. The meditation helps keep me regulated and, has helped me quite a bit. And then understanding how much damage some of my childhood did to me helps me realize how I need to be, or I want to be, a better parent. And but the second part of that is with breaking generational cycles is I spend a few minutes, even if it's only 5 or 10 minutes every day, present with my children, like actually talking to them and, having conversations with them and laughing with them because I didn't have emotional availability as a child.
Yeah. Yeah, you
Right.
as a child, you were essentially talked at, not talked with, right?
And I think yelled at quite a bit too.
Yelled at quicker, yeah. Where
Yeah.
now, right? You're trying to be that dad that you didn't have, right? That emotional
100%.
support, that love, that small couple minutes where you talk to them where you didn't get, and that's one of the biggest things because think of it, right? If you never go and get your help and do all and get in check in on your mental health and do what was right, you would have went through the same cycles and the same, same advances as you were when you were a kid.
So
So
much so.
yeah, it's tough. So, men's mental health, right? Men's mental health taboo. Why do warriors like you suffer in silence? And what's the first steps to smashing?
We suffer in silence because society has told us that silence is strength. Oh man. Yeah. Like I used to think that I was so strong. And I want to relate a story. So when I was 20, actually, when I was 8, my grandpa, who was my hero, died. And I couldn't cry. I couldn't cry because, obviously I thought it was boys didn't cry. I don't know. When I was 20 years old, a good friend of mine died. And I bragged that I was so strong, I didn't cry at the
You
funeral.
didn't cry. Yeah.
I bragged about that. And man, like if my good friend of mine died now, I'd be crying like a baby.
Yeah, exactly.
The first step to smashing that, I think for me is two-part. And the one part is I cry if appropriate in front of my children. I show them that a man can show his and feel his emotions. And in my parenting, I accept their emotions. Even if they're a so-called negative one, I accept it and hold space for it. The other part to that is what we are doing right now is having this discussion about men's mental health and being a lived, doing by example and showing others that this is okay,
Yeah.
right?
Two
Healthy
men, yeah.
people. Yeah.
Healthy people can talk it out. It's so true,
Yes.
right? Because I suffer from anxiety and depression, right? And I explain to people, people ask me all the time, because I can, my professional life, I'm good at it. And people ask me, well, what it's like. And I explain it all the time quickly is like I have 12 bricks on my chest every morning I wake up, right? And throughout the
Hmm.
day, some days I'm able to get them all off. Some days I'm able to get 6 of them off or 4 of them off. But when I wake up the next morning, all 12 are back right on my chest, right?
Yeah.
And it's tough. It's tough, in the depression too. It's, and I'm grateful that I'm able to get the help that I need. And the big thing I think that you had mentioned, right, was, when the counselor said to you, I know. And it's like, well, if you know, then you should be able to sit there and, like you just simply said, have a conversation about it, right? Because all we're looking for is someone to we just want to be heard. We just want to be seen. We just want our feelings to be validated.
Yeah.
And so,
100%. And sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
no, I said some people may laugh when they hear that guys want their feelings validated, but we do,
Of course we do.
you know?
N- and that's what our kids want too. And so that's what our inner child wants is some validation.
Exactly.
To be clear, the person that I said I know and walked out of the room, that wasn't a counselor. That was somebody in my personal life.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was somebody in my personal life. But I do want to go back to that whole holding space thing because I was too scared to tell my counselor at that time because I thought, once again, suicide watch, whatever.
Yeah. Work, out of work, you're gonna be, never be able to work again almost.
Yeah. When I
Yeah.
found when I found the psychologist that I ended up going to that to help me, I knew she was gonna help me. I'd read her biography on, Psychology Today or whatever it is, and so I knew she was gonna help me. And when I my first appointment was for an hour, and I sat and cried in her office for almost 2 hours. And when I look back on that meeting, all she really did was hold space.
Cold space, yeah.
She really didn't say a lot. I just cried. Like, I remember something about what's going on or something, and then I started crying, and, like, but I knew that I was safe, and I wanna share a story about that because, honestly, I think that's all we need to know or all we need to do to help someone. So, going through that whole process of, self-discovery and the stigma surrounding the mental health completely changed who I was. I became incredibly more empathetic. I recognized the signs in other people. So late one night, I was out on patrol out in the middle of nowhere, and I stopped a vehicle for speeding. And it was going quite fast over the speed limit. I can't remember the numbers, but I pull it over. It's a guy, a male in his truck, and he's getting his documents for me, and I'm standing there watching him. I'm like, man, this guy's having a bad day. And so I'm like, sir, just stop for a second. Like, just pretend, forget that I'm in uniform. And from one man to another man, are you okay? And he wasn't. And he just started crying. And, I just stood there and I like held that space for him. I got him some resources. And you know what? When I left, I'm like, hey man, like, do you need anything else? Are you gonna be okay? And he's like, man, I'm gonna be okay. And he was able to like cry a bunch of it out of his system. And I know from my own experience, if you sit and cry, for 5 minutes or whatever, you get clarity and you can start thinking through things, right?
Yeah.
And so that's all he needed. And as a man, I know how hard it is to like cry in front of another man and then when you put that uniform there, it's probably even harder. So imagine how bad his day must have been.
Must have really been. And thank God, right, that you
Yeah.
were the one that caught him because you could see that something, hey, something's really going on with him. And he's not drinking, he's not on drugs. There's something really going on here. And it's, and thank God, right? Because I think the biggest thing I tell people now is what I do is, people will ask you, hey, how you doing? Right. And the generic answer is, I'm good. I'm good. I'm okay. Right.
Yep.
And then I say, hey, how are you really feeling today?
Mhm.
And some people will open up, others won't. But, that's one of the biggest things. And that's one of the things I love is that I think men, I was on Pete versus Anxiety's podcast last night, and Pete versus the Anxiety Pod, he's the best. And we were talking, and it's always good, even like you and I now, Laverne, talking, two guys, talking about mental health. We're not supposed to be
Absolutely.
doing this, they say, right? But I
Yeah.
love to do it because I love to smash the taboo and the bullshit because men, you're allowed to talk about it. You're allowed to tell your feelings. I say it all the time. They can reach out to me. My number's everywhere, you know, and it's one of those where guys need to realize that if we're not taking care of ourselves, we can't take care of anyone else,
So much. Yep.
and I like to say, you don't mental health, right? People always say, "Oh, there's something wrong with you. There's something this." I say it, right? If you break your arm, you go to the doctors, right? To take care of your health. Well, mental health is your health. So if there's something
Mhm.
wrong, you go get treatment and you go seek it, right? Because too many guys don't. And then it ends up in bad places where we end up, unfortunately, in funeral parlors burying them.
Yeah. It's so true. And, I recently met a lady near where I live that owns a funeral home. And her brother started it's called Men's Shed. I think it's all over North America. And they started a chapter of Men's Shed. And I'm like, so why did you start this? Because it's a female. I'm like, why did you use, like, why are you involved in this? She's like, because I see it in the funeral home. I see what happens when men don't take care of their mental health. And I'm like, wow. Right? So that's a pretty strong indicator there, right? And
Powerful.
yeah,
How prevalent it really is, but still nobody will talk about it.
and it when I went through all that pain and that, I had depression, anxiety, hypervigilance through the roof. I was hostile. It was a miserable, miserable time for me. And when I started coming out the other side and I'm like, wait a minute, we all have this mental health thing. And I'm like,
Yeah.
we're not talking about it. This is fucking bullshit.
Crazy.
Like,
Absolutely fucking bullshit.
I'm
Exactly.
like,
Yeah.
my kids were at risk of losing their dad because we don't talk about this.
Yeah.
This is stupid.
Stupid.
And
Exactly.
and I knew, like, I'm like, I am going to talk about this, right? And I knew that before I was ever ready to talk about it. And there's another key component to this that I want to share. About 6 months after I had started seeing the psychologist that was actually helping me,
Yeah.
and I was at the courthouse, I go down there for a case or whatever, and there was a retired police officer there that knew me. And as soon as he saw me, he left the conversation he was in and he's like, Laverne, can I talk to you for a second? I said, sure. We get in this little room and he's like, hey, what's going on? And I knew exactly what he meant, but at that point I was still stigmatizing it. I'm like, oh, what do you mean? And he's like, listen, dude, I have PTSD too.
Yeah.
And then he told me his story and how he had got through it. And man, that was like a golden hug from the universe. I knew without a doubt that I was going to be okay just because he had come and helped me
It
and
helped
said
you.
that
Yeah.
and told me his story. And it's that pure interaction. And that is so powerful.
Yeah. And that's what I say about, like me from Mental Health Mondays that I do it, if we can just help one woman or guy, right?
Mhm.
And they listen and say, "Hey, I'm gonna get some help," or "Hey, I'm gonna contact a buddy of mine and talk to him," or "I'm gonna get some counseling," just one person. But just imagine there's more than one. There's millions, right?
Right.
Millions, right?
Yeah.
And still some of them are still stuck behind that, "Hey, I'm a guy, I shouldn't tell you my feelings or this," and I tell them all the time, I have no problem. I think you hit it right on the head was, holding space, holding space. That's key, key.
So much. Yeah.
So a couple more questions, right? Hypervigilance in daily life, triggers today, and the unfiltered truth on taming a body wired for war. How do you deal with that?
My hypervigilance is I don't think I've had any now for a couple years. It's how do I deal with that? Proactively.
Yeah. Instead
I
of
deal with
reactively back in the past. Yeah.
I start I over time I learned several good tools for, keeping me calm, whatever. Frequent exercise, meditation are my go-tos. Eating relatively healthy, like not just lots of junk food. And journaling if I really need to. And so basically I get my good baseline out of that and then I really pay attention. But I think one of the big key things is I'm not in that environment anymore.
Yeah.
I'm not constantly looking over my shoulder. And for me at my last job, it was I would get in my patrol vehicle and then I would have to look over my shoulder. But the really unfortunate part of that is when I got back to the office, I really had to look over my shoulder as well.
Yeah.
And
And you're
so
not in that headspace either anymore either.
no. So, once you stop drinking the poison, you realize how much you drank and then you start getting better there. The nervous system wired for war. Part of that is I only realized about a year ago that my nervous system was finally calm for the first time in my life.
In your life.
Right? There's no threats to me, right? And that's ongoing. That is I about a few months ago, I dipped my toes back into the dating world after being single for a couple years. And you want to talk about exposing some nervous system, deeply held fears and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
So that provided an opportunity to do some more work on myself. But it's just recognizing them when they come up and dealing with them.
Yeah.
Um, and for trigger, I think you had mentioned something about triggers.
Yeah. Triggers. Yeah.
So I used to think of triggers as like, getting really angry and, a whole body reaction, the physiological reaction. I actually had one, a small one about a month ago, I would say. I was at my current job. I now work in landscaping. I don't really have to deal with anybody. I get to be outside all the time. So it's perfect. It's
Yeah.
perfect for me. And I got out of my truck, and it was earlier in the morning, like 7 in the morning. It's very dark up here in the winter, and as I got out of my truck, I heard someone screaming, I need someone to call the police right away." And then I heard a window slam, and I'm like, "Oh, shit." And so I called 911 and I kind of walked across the street to kind of get the address and stuff like that. And I had just a little reaction where I'm like, and I wanted to start crying. And what it is it's my body remembering all those times.
Yep.
But I think what kind of triggered it was I was helpless because I couldn't go help her because she was inside the building now, right? Like the
Yep.
window had slammed. And I realized I'm like, that's might have been like, it goes back to childhood,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because if I could have ran across the street and yelled at some guy or whatever, hey, stop,
Yeah. Yeah.
I would have been doing something. I wouldn't have been helpless. So anyway, it's kind of fun to think about for me. Like I'm fascinated by the whole psychology stuff, right?
Uh,
But
there's so much, and one of the biggest things, right, too, Laverne, is when you start healing, right, and you go through the trauma and you start growing, right, again, and you realize, right, how much clarity you have, right, and you look back at certain situations and you forgive yourself, right, then you forgive others because the hardest thing that we do is oftentimes when you're healing, right, you don't forgive yourself,
no,
you know,
yeah, you're so right.
you know,
Yeah,
because you
and
got to get
it's
back to that self love.
for me. It was always the shame, like you're such a loser. You should be stronger than this or whatever it was, right? And just getting to recognize that part and silence that critic that is not actually who I am. It's somebody else's voice that created that critic.
Exactly. So, right, the last question for the listeners, right, that are chained in their own trauma. What's one action that they can start today to get them out of that hole?
I would say start to question themselves and just kind of bring themselves self-awareness, right? Why am I getting so angry at this? Why am I getting so upset at my wife or my kids for this? Because really, it's not that big of a deal. Or why do I think this way? Right. And just start questioning. And anybody can do that. Journal. One journaling tip that I've been told is, why? And then write the answer down and then why and just keep going. Right. And I know it's not accessible to everyone, but I think everybody should have a good therapist.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. Sometimes down here in the States, the hardest part becomes trying to get one and find one that takes insurance. Or some don't take insurances. And then if they do, they're not taking new patients, right?
Mm.
And it's one of those where it's so frustrating because I had to wait for a new therapist for shit. Mine retired in early summer and I didn't get a new one until January.
Oh, wow.
Because I was
Yeah.
waiting, and it was the worst feeling knowing, like, and I down here in the States, we have 988, which is the crisis and suicide hotline that's manned 24/7. It's fully staffed 24/7, 365. You can call it, text it. I use that on nights at 3 o'clock in the morning where I was like, you know, I need
Yeah.
somebody. So I would text that or call it and have conversations. And you know what? Talk about a lifesaver. 988's
Mhm.
one of the best resources and tools that you can have, I think.
Yeah.
I'm not afraid to
That's
admit it either.
yeah, that's
You
amazing.
know? You know?
I'm not sure, like, how the insurance works down there. Like, here, for psychologists or therapists, you do need is to have insurance, otherwise it's quite costly.
Yeah, it's out of pocket, yeah.
Yeah, and they are worth that money,
No doubt
if you
about
can
it. Yeah.
afford it. There seems to be a lot of them here, like, there's a lot to choose from. The problem is, like, when I went through mine, I didn't know how it worked,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
didn't know how this like, I thought Emerge, I thought, like, the emergency room, I thought, crisis center, whatever, but that was another thing that kinda messed me up is I knew what happened when you called the crisis center and said you were suicidal.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
They
Yeah.
called the police and then,
Yeah.
so that wasn't an option for me either,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Well,
So
that's the great
it's
thing down here with the 988. It's confidential. It's when you call, they say you're gonna hurt yourself, and it's one of those where, I implore people, if you are in that state and you are gonna hurt yourself, just let them know, because you're going through it. And if it's 3 o'clock in the morning, or I don't care if it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you have nobody to talk to, just let them know. It's not the end of the world. Nobody's gonna look
yeah,
down on you. We want you here. You belong here. You deserve to be here.
yeah. There's so much stigma around mental health and around suicide, and, I started realizing it. I took a so while I like, looking at the time frame, I think I was still kinda going through my mental health crisis, and I took an applied suicide intervention skills training course.
Okay.
And in that course, they had a sign in where you'd sign in And then they asked you a bunch of questions like, "Have you ever thought of suicide?" There was 4 questions, and then I think one was actively suicidal. And I was one of the last people in the course, and I looked around and I'm like, "Oh, fuck, I'm not gonna answer this correctly." Right? Like, that ever-present cynic. So I started like, made my answers seem much more, I guess, healthier than I
Then
thought
you
it
really
should.
were.
Yeah, but I read everybody else's answers, and pretty much everybody in there had thought of suicide at some point, and I'm like, "What?" Like, and then I learned how common it was to, because I didn't understand anything about it. Like, there's this continuum or a ladder or whatever from, having a suicidal thought to completing it, and, there's so much stigma, and we just need to talk about it some more.
That's it. Just talk it out. I'm a big firm believer of there's no shame in talking. There's no shame in telling people how you feel, because like I said, everyone deserves to be here and you may not be in a good place mentally, but look, I always tell them you can reach out to me if you need someone to talk to. I'll help you out the best that I can, and if not, we'll get you to a therapist or we'll get you to some help, because I don't want to see, one's too many, right? I was talking to Pete last night and Pete was talking about the second age group, right, for suicide in the United States of America. And you're not going to believe this is age 11 through 14. He
You
goes,
know
this is when the conversations matter, right? 11 to 14. Who would think that? They're kids,
Yeah. Um,
you know?
I don't know, man. Like, my daughter is 11 now,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we've had this conversation, and that's another reason I'm so open about my mental health, because I want them to be open about it too, and I want them to see. And
And let them know it's okay to talk to you about it. It's okay.
yes,
One of the big things I say, Laverne, is it's okay not to be okay. And if you're
a
not,
hundred.
talk to somebody.
And I literally have that T-shirt. I
Yeah.
have 2 of them. It's okay to not be okay.
Yeah, and that's the big thing. I tell people it's okay. We live in a world, right? That's so fast and so quick, and some people don't even care, if you were here tomorrow, right? But there are a lot of people that, there's more people that care about you than don't, right?
Yeah, and you don't realize how many people care.
You
But
don't until you're in the shit, right?
I wanna share a quick story I just thought of,
Yeah, go ahead, brother.
with my daughter. I'm pretty open about my mental health challenges and stuff, and I have my kids know that I go on podcasts, I tell my story, and I do public speaking. And last summer, I was invited to an event that was outdoors, and, I had my kids, and I'm like, "You know what? We're gonna go. They're gonna see dad speak. You know what?"
Yeah.
And it was a outdoor event, and there's the kind of the stage area, the seating area, and then over next to it was a playground. And so my kids at that time were 8 and 10, and of course they run over, they're going on the playground. So then they introduce me, I get up, I start speaking. And while I'm talking, I see my daughter run right across, right in front of me, and she finds a seat right in the front row, and she sits there and she's just like staring. She's in awe, and she's just so proud that her dad is up there talking. And for me, it's just, I'm so thankful
Yeah.
that all those years ago I stayed,
Yeah,
right?
you
And I
stayed.
and I
And thank God to your daughter, right, for crawling into bed that night, and giving you that love that you needed at that time, right? And she was a kid, 3 years old. She couldn't articulate it all, but you know what? It was all in that coming up, cuddling up right next to you, right? So you could feel it. And thank God it was almost like, God put her in that position to go in and be like, "Hey, dad needs it, right? Dad needs that." And that, thank God you're here, and
I,
spreading the word and spreading the message, and that must have been so cool, right? Being able to be up there, right? Thinking
mhm.
back to when you were a kid and everything was, quiet and hush hush, and they want you to shut up and we'll talk to the church about it. And here you are, right, with your daughter in the front row telling your story, right? It's powerful. It's powerful, and it's men like you that we're gonna smash the stigma. We're gonna get more people to talk about this, and that's what it's all about, Laverne. And I appreciate you coming on, sharing your time with me, sharing your story with me, being so vulnerable with me. Right? It was amazing, brother. It really was. You know?
Thank you for having me. I jump at this opportunity any chance I get.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing this and having these conversations, because you might never know, but it's helping people.
I appreciate that, brother. You know what? I can tell people this all, and I say it right, Laverne. And I don't know how you might feel the same way. I feel great having this conversation, right? Because in a way, it helps me myself as well. You know? Yeah. You know. So Laverne Friesen from the depths of cult horrors, right? badge battles and breakdowns. You've climbed the heights that humble us all. Your raw, unfiltered truth isn't just shared, it's a lifeline tossed to the drowning. A cycle breaker for generations, a testament that healing isn't pretty, but it's possible. You've gifted my listeners not words, but weapons. Hope sharpened by your scars. Spirituality fueled by your fire. Uncle Jimmy's podcast family, carry Laverne's roar. Share this episode. Live his lessons. Rise from your own ashes. Laverne, thank you. Doesn't touch it. Your journey compensates us 1,000-fold. You're not just a guest, you're a legend, brother. Grace, peace, and endless gratitude. Until next time, keep breaking those chains, my brother.
Thanks, Jimmy. You too.
Thanks, Paul. Peace and love. Peace and love. Uncle Jimmy out.